Senhoras e senhores,
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all of you. In a few minutes, we are going to start the international seminar about renewable energies, advances and opportunities for sustainable development. We would like to request all of you to take your seats and please switch off your cell phones or keep them on the silent mode.
senhoras e senhores,
Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to remind you that this event can be followed virtually on YouTube. The address of the YouTube channel can be found in the hot site of the subscription of the event. At this moment, we're going to watch a contextualization video.
Vivemos momento de transição. Já sabemos que as sociedades
We
industriais
live a transition
têm que
moment. We know that
avaliar bem as
industrial
consequências
societies
de
need
suas
to evaluate the
decisões.
consequences
O
of the
Tribunal de
decisions.
Contas da União
The Court of
considera
Accounts,
que
the Federal
com
Court
as
of Accounts
energias
considers that the
renováveis não
renewable
poderia ser
energies,
diferente.
it would not be different.
Ainda hoje, a matriz
Today,
energética mundial
the
é
world
extremamente
energy
dependente
mix
das
is
fontes
dependent
não
on the
renováveis de
non-renewable
energia.
sources of
E,
energy.
na verdade,
And in fact,
esses elementos fósseis
these
são
fossil elements
responsáveis
are
pela grande
responsible
parte das
for a great
emissões
part
que
of
causam o
the
efeito estufa.
emissions that
que tem
cause
atraído a
greenhouse
atenção sobre as
gas
energias renováveis.
effect. What attracts the
intermitentes,
use of the
a
renewable
eólica,
energies
solar,
such as
principalmente,
intermittent
são dois pontos fundamentais.
as the
O primeiro
wind
deles é o
and
desenvolvimento de
solar
novas tecnologias.
is the new
O mundo
development of new
vem
technologies.
produzindo
The
novas
world has
tecnologias
produced
que
new
permitem
technologies
você
that allow you
implantar essas
to implement
energias renováveis,
the
do
renewable
tipo eólico e
energies
solar.
such
E outra
as
questão é o
wind
apelo
or
mundial
solar
pela
PV.
descarbonização.
Another point is
Um dos
the
fatores
world
primordiais para a expansão sustentável dessa
search
energia,
for
seja no Brasil ou em qualquer
decarbonization.
local do mundo, São
The
políticas direcionadas
policies
do governo, porque
directed
essas políticas vão
to the
sinalizar
government
para o
to
mercado,
tackle
para os
the
agentes, para os
renewable
consumidores,
energies. These policies will
quais serão os
signal
custos
to the
associados a essa
agents, to the
energia,
consumers, the
quais os
associated
horizontes a
costs
gente
of
pode
the
trabalhar em
energy,
termos de
the
investimentos.
horizons that
A
we
gente está falando em
can
energia
study in terms of
elétrica
investments. We're
renovável,
talking
a gente
about
precisa de um
renewable
investidor
electricity, but we need
colocando
investors
recursos nessa matriz.
to
As medidas governamentais no sentido de
provide the
superar os
resources in the
desafios para a
matrices.
inserção de
The
novas
measures
fontes
to
renováveis
overcome
na
the
energia
challenges for the insertion
passam,
of
sobretudo, pela
renewable
remoção
energy in
de
our
barreiras
matrix
para
goes
que
through
essas
the
fontes
removal
participem
of
da
obstacles for
expansão, baseada no valor em que elas agregam
the sources to
ao sistema,
participate in
tirando
the
proveito
value
dos benefícios que essa
adding to
tecnologia
the
pode
system
trazer.
and the benefit that the technologies can bring. In that sense, some guidelines are fundamental for the governmental work. First, the permanent enhancement of the market design of electricity in Brazil. Second, to guarantee the general consistency of the public policies in the energy area and the best integration of these policies in the other dimensions of public policies. And third, to guarantee that the regulation can be flexible, robust, and above all, transparent and adaptive to this scenario. The first solution is to identify the services provided by the generators and the infrastructure that the generators use to provide the service. For example, during the day, there are moments that you have little wind, and a generator is providing the service to substitute the wind. Also, there are generators as backup for the system to wait for a moment where there are lots of clouds and you cannot have a lot of sun. So when you have these resources, you can allocate them efficiently for the consumers. The second step is to identify the subsides that the renewable energies do not need anymore, so that they can have a better competition with the other sources and they will not be demonized in the future. The third one is to identify the value of the supply security, and it can be paid for all the consumers that are benefited by the supply security. TCU aims to improve the public administration through works like this that shows opportunities of improvement for the energy generation. This seminar has as a goal to broadcast the main results of the coordinated audit in the scope of OLACEFs regarding renewable energies, to debate important aspects, relevant aspects related to the expansion of renewable energy in the Brazilian electric sector, and also in the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean region. Also to provide reflections regarding the follow-up of future public policies in the increase of renewable energy in Brazil and Latin America in a context of sustainable energy. In this moment, we'd like to invite for the opening panel of the seminar Minister José Múcio Monteiro. With him, the ambassador of the German Republic in Brazil, George Whistle, and Bento Albuquerque, the Ministry of Mining and Energy, the Justice of the Federal Court of Account, Haroldo Cedras. It's okay. The official of projects of the Environment Program of the United Nations, UNEP, Asher Lassos. Would you please take your seats? Also, we'd like to salute the other authorities, managers, and service providers present here. In this moment, we'd like to give the floor to the Minister of Mines and Energy, Bento Albuquerque. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to express my gratitude to the President of the Federal Court of Accounts, Minister José Múcio, and also Minister Haroldo Cedras for the honorable invitation to participate in this event. It's an event that tackles a very current topic, and it's a very important topic for the energy transition. And as we could see in that video, it is a situation that concerns the whole world, and the solutions and the innovation have allowed many countries to overcome the challenges that they have ahead. Also, I'd like to salute the ambassador of the German Republic in Brazil, George Witchell, and also Asher Lesser from the UNEP and the present authorities. All of you, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to address something that is related to our country, Brazil. I start highlighting that the expansion of renewable energy in the electric sector in Brazil has as a main instrument the energy planning, the national energy planning, with two products. The first one is the decennial energy plan that is updated every year, and also the national energy plan that subsides and guides the energy policies in Brazil for the next 30 years. It is revisited every 4 years. Such instruments guide the management of the energy matrix in Brazil. Another important aspect is the participation of the civil society and public entities, either in the planning or in the proposal of changes and adjustments in the regulatory and legal environments, which reinforces the pillars of the current governance and energetic policy, predictability, transparency, and security. Today, the Brazilian energy mix has 45% of clean resources, while the world average is 14%. Now, our electric matrix is around 85% made of renewable sources, such as hydropower, wind, solar PV, and biomass. And then it will remain like this, reinforcing the concern with the use of renewable energies, in perfect harmony with the Brazilian commitment signed in the Paris Agreement, in which the country committed to reduce the GHG in 37% up to 2025 and 43% up to 2030 compared to the emissions of 2005. Today, the wind and solar and biomass sources have the total of 30,000 megawatts installed, and we estimate that in the next 10 years, other 30,000 megawatts will be added to the interconnected system. President Bolsonaro's government has done all efforts to keep the clean energy matrix, which will contribute to the preservation of the environment and the combat to climate change with the constant reduction of GHG, or greenhouse gases. This is the reason that we have faced the challenge of creating public policies that meet the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, especially facing the increase of the demand of energy that will double in the next decade. Such public policies aim to find our favorable aspects, not based in the teachings from the past, in the low carbon policies, and also the pro-alcohol program that was launched 40 years ago as our first initiative. From 2020, we're going to implement one of the biggest program in the transport area, Renewable, which relates to the participation of the biofuels in the expansion of production, which will provide an environmental gain corresponding to the reduction of emissions in over 22 tons of CO2 per year. Also, we are promoting partnerships, international partnerships, to combine the use of biofuels with electrification, with goals that are already planned and defined. In the electricity field, we're going to continue the programs for the use of renewable energy, such as biomass, photovoltaic, and wind, as a solution for supplying the interconnected national system, and also to assist the isolated communities that today depend on the generation using fossil fuels. Therefore, our challenge in the energy sector is to promote the expansion of the matrix, safeguarding the energy security and fulfilling the sustainable development goals, as well as guaranteeing the access by the consumers and also by the industry. Lastly, I would like to highlight the importance for harmonious action and transparent action in a partnership with the different instances of the legislative and executive branches, the private sector, and society. The control agencies, the national congresses, and the regulating agency are important to guarantee the institutional security of the country, bringing more stability and reliability, creating a business environment that's favorable to the conducting of the public policies. I would like to congratulate one more time the Federal Court of Accounts to promote this debate that will certainly contribute for the improvement of our energy mix. Thank you so much.
At this moment, we would like to pass the floor to the Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany in Brazil, Mr. Georg Witschel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Mr. José Múcio Monteiro, the President of the Federal Court of Accounts. Good morning, Mr. Haroldo Cedras, Minister Rapporteur of the Brazilian National Audit of the Federal Court of Accounts. Your Excellency, Mr. Bento Albuquerque, Minister of the Ministry of Mines and Energy. Mr. Asher Lessos, Task Manager from UNEP. Dear ladies and gentlemen and friends, I wish you all a wonderful day. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for the kind invitation to take part in this international seminar regarding renewable energy. So this meeting represents an action that is a result of the technical cooperation between the governments of Germany and Brazil. This cooperation already has a history of almost 60 years. Almost 60 years of joint work so that we can have and promote sustainable development. The Brazilian government has been investing a lot in order to try to meet the demands, the energy demands that is required by its economic growth. The Minister Bento Albuquerque has already explained this, that they want to double, and so we're going to have an ever-growing demand. And at the same time, we have to ensure the supply with an electric matrix that is going to generate low environmental impacts. a precursor in Latin America in the production of energy that does not emit CO2. Brazil has been betting not only in the hydroelectrical power plants that are large, that represent over half of the capacity that Brazil has installed, but Brazil has also been betting in non-conventional sources of energy with a huge potential. And they are also trying to generate clean energy, such as biomass, solar, and wind energy production. As a result of this, the electrical matrix in Brazil is being extremely diversified. Almost 20% of the capacity that has already been installed is coming from other renewable energy sources. That is, from more environmental friendly alternatives. And so I'm sure that meeting the demands of this ever-growing need for energy is a considerable challenge. And so this is how it happens in Brazil as well as in Germany. And so in Germany, we are also going through a transition process that we call Energiewende, and it also focuses in renewables. But our problem is that we don't have the huge rivers and large rivers that you have in Brazil, and we don't have strong winds as you have in the north of Brazil. So Brazil has a few advantages over Germany. So we are absolutely sure that we have a lot to learn together. We have many experiences to share. So along this path, 4 major challenges seem to me that deserve a lot of attention, our attention. The first challenge is trying to find an efficient way to distribute energy. So generation is one thing, but distribution is another. When we talk about wind energy, for instance, the highest potential that Brazil has is in the northeast of Brazil. And although the highest consumption is in the south and the southeast regions, and this energy has to be transported via a country that is almost as big as a continent. And so we have 24 Germanys inside one Brazil. And so the second challenge is the need to generate a workforce or a labor force that is highly qualified so that they can plan and create investment in renewables, besides ensuring the maintenance of the grid. And so this point has to be seen as a huge opportunity so that jobs can be generated and the economy can be boosted. The third main challenge is the constant search for innovation, maintenance, and coordination of projects that are interconnected by smart grids. In order to have higher efficiency, we need to invest in the advancement of the infrastructure of the grid, and also add smart grids into the public network with communication systems, with data analysis. And also within this important context, we should try to increase the production of renewables in households. And the fourth challenge, without any doubt, is the support to the improvement of the capacity of the institutions, of the creators of public policies, and also the important stakeholders in the sector. It's fundamental to think about planning, regulation, and also business models that are appropriate for Brazil. The combination of all of these 4 factors is going to favor more and more the generation of distributed energy, or energy that can be distributed. And it's going to be more common for citizens to have inside their homes solar panels, a small wind turbine or wind fan, or maybe a biogas plant. And then they're going to be able to generate electricity for their own consumption and also feed the grid. Now we're not only talking about consumers, but we're talking about prosumers. Prosumers, they are producers and consumers of energy at the same time, the prosumers. So within this scenario, it's very, very important to establish rules, regulations, and fees and taxes that are going to be able to make this economic model be sustainable. Before this challenging scenario, we're going to discuss a little bit of what the Brazil-Germany cooperation projects are doing. This cooperation is aiming at promoting environmentally correct measures, and we are trying to implement them together for the generation of renewable energy and to improve the generation of energy in key factors and also to introduce new technologies. In Brazil, the German government cooperates with different government stakeholders, mainly the Ministry of Mines and Energy and the National Agency of Electrical Energy, and also the Federal Court of Accounts, the TCU, and other regulatory agencies, and also energies that promote energy efficiency. Our partnership fosters dialogue, cooperation among the public stakeholders and also private stakeholders within the sector, and we facilitate the sharing of knowledge, technologies, and knowledge. Together with the Ministry of Mines and Energy and also the National Federation of Cooperatives, we have been launching business models that aim at cooperation so that we can disseminate and spread out energy all over the country. This approximation work between the public and the private sector and the civil society is an important solution so that we can implement innovation systems that are going to contribute so that we can respect the Paris Agreement. Besides that, the German cooperation supports the study in the electrical sector in Brazil so that we can improve the integration conditions of different sources of renewable energy in the energy mix that we have in Brazil. I'm going to conclude my participation here with a last remark. Within the energy partnership between Brazil and Germany, we have a connection between the two ministries. We have an exchange platform, a bilateral platform that is very, very good for energy policies. And I'm very glad to announce here the addition of the Energy Transition Dialogue that is going to have its 6th edition in Berlin. Thousands and thousands of participants are going to be invited to Berlin in March of 2020 so that we can debate the energy transition, the global energy transition. For me, it's going to be a great honor and a great pleasure to hand to Mr. Bento Albuquerque, the Minister of Mines and Energy, an invitation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that is my boss, Mr. Mas, and also from the Ministry of Economy, Mr. Alaman. And I'm going to hand the invitation to you, Mr. Minister. And this is a window of opportunity so that we can defend a transition that is fair and inclusive, capable of bringing economic benefits, environmental benefits, and social benefits to our societies. Let's work together so that we can have a climate economy and so that we can avoid the huge risks of not doing anything. I wish to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, a wonderful seminar and excellent debates. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.
Senhoras e senhores,
Ladies and gentlemen, now we're going to listen to the President of the Federal Court of Accounts, Justice José Múcio Monteiro. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to greet the Ambassador of the Republic of Germany, George Witschel, Minister Bento Albuquerque, who has just been summoned at his ministry, and he had to leave. But I greet his representative here. Also, the representative of the United Nations Environment Program, Asher Lastels, and the other authorities, civil servants, secretaries, and all you, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank you for your presence here, and I salute especially our Secretary for the Electric Sector Audit for the initiative of this seminar. I have a great satisfaction to be here because one of the pillars of the work of TCU is the strengthening of the interinstitutional relationship and the establishment of dialogue channels from the public sector to the civil society and the academia. Today we will have the opportunity to discuss some of the most important topics of the new millennium. The economic model that was adopted in the past decades brought with it serious environmental risks, which can be a threat for the life of the future generations. One of the main consequences of the unsustainable rhythm of the exploration of the natural resources is the climate change process caused by the greenhouse gas. It's a problem that doesn't respect boundaries or country frontiers, so it has to be tackled transnationally by the governments. That's why there are international agreements that in view the global cooperation in that sense, such as the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda of the UN. The energy matrix is still dependent on the fossil fuels, the environmental issues, and the limited amount of these fuels oblige us to have the energy transition looking for renewable energy sources in a more sustainable development model. The renewable energies has been have proved to be more effective than the traditional energy sources. There was an auction with the price of 70 megawatts, and in previous years this value was above 200 reais by megawatt. In turn, the photovoltaic solar energy has been more efficient and cheaper, reaching in the last auctions the price of 120 megawatts reais per megawatt. It brings opportunities in decreasing the cost of energy and the reduction of the tariff paid by the consumer, bringing development of the economy, with the advent of new businesses and new technologies. So the energy transition towards renewable energy shows challenges for the operation of electrical systems in the country. We still need to define the best strategies and mechanisms for the expansion of these sources, adapt the regulation of electrical systems with the specificities, and mitigate the effects of the high variation in the wind and solar photovoltaic generation, electricity generation. We expect that the coordinated audit on renewable energy done by the 12 countries of OLSF and the debate in this seminar can bring subsides for the improvement of the action of agencies and entities in the energy transition of our countries. I would like to congratulate all of you my rapporteur, Haroldo Cedrais, for the dedication and the enthusiasm that you have in this topic. He has been an advocate for the production of knowledge to include Brazil in a comfortable and respectful position. It is one of the main challenges of the future generations, and we have the potential for all the energy sources. But sometimes, unfortunately, we confuse uh, energy policies with policies of energy policies. So we stop looking for and also searching for the best pathways because of electoral concerns or news that can bring votes. So we are more concerned sometimes with the next election, and sometimes we forget the next generation. We have a giant legacy to leave to the youth of this country, and a massive justification to provide the legacy of what could have been done, and we lost time with small issues. So this is not the way we want. So I'd like to congratulate all the organization of this event and my dear friend, the rapporteur of this topic, Haroldo Cedras. Mr. Ambassador, it's an honor to receive you here with us, and also our colleagues from GIZ and our extraordinary partnership that we have had to construct a better future. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
We are now going to conclude the opening ceremony of the seminar, and we are going to now to disassemble the first panel. Your authorities, could you please take your seats in the first line of this auditorium, the first row of chairs of this auditorium. Ladies and gentlemen, at this moment, we would like to invite to give its presentation the panorama of Latin America and the Caribbean, a coordinated auditing about renewables. The Minister and the Justice, the President of the Federal Court of Accounts, Mr. Haroldo Cedras. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to greet in my name, on behalf of my dear colleagues who organized this event. First of all, I would like to greet Mr. Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany in Brazil, Mr. Georg Witschel. Welcome to our event. And it's a great honor and a great joy also to be able to greet the representative of the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, Mr. Asher Lessos. And also, I'm very glad and honored to have you here this morning with us. Since the Federal Court of Accounts here in Brazil, the TCU, in the last few years, has been invited in a very wonderful way to take part in many world events organized by the United Nations. And so we have been invited to attend 3 events throughout the year by this organization that is simply the guardian of democracy in the world, the United Nations. So the TCU feels very honored for having taken part in such wonderful events throughout its history. I would also like to greet Mr. Rave Barros from the Ministry of Mines and Energy, and here he's representing Minister Bento Albuquerque. And I would also like to say that I have to greet in a special way Mr. Paulo Vichers, General Secretary of the Federal Court of Accounts, and Dr. Manuel that with lots of dedication and competence, with its extraordinary team, has endeavored a huge effort so that we could all be here today discussing, listening, learning, debating this topic that is extremely, extremely relevant. The president of the TCU, Mr. José Múcio Monteiro, when he gave me this task of speaking on behalf of our court, and he has already developed extraordinary work in this sector regarding these public policies, this public policy that is very important, the electrical sector. When he worked at the National Congress and now here at the TCU, he would be much more competent to speak here. And so we're lucky because in our plenary we have justices, former justices that are very, very competent regarding the sector. They know everything about the sector, and they have already shown to us how competent they are by working with this public policy. We also have a technical department that knows this topic deeply, and we are proud of them because they are dedicated civil servants of the TCU, of the Federal Court of Accounts, this topic that is so dear to all of us. And so this coordinated auditing, coordinated by the TCU, involving the SAIs of the other OLACEF countries. We have a friend here, Dr. Eringi, that at the moment he is cooperating with this cooperation besides the German cooperation with the GIZ. He is a member of the external control body that is from Mexico, and we are all endeavoring an effort in our organization, and we are at Intosai, and this organization is very important for the United Nations, and it has been growing not only because it encompasses 193 countries, but because the UN has already understood that world democracy is at risk, at enormous risks and unique risks per region, per state, and our Intosai that encompasses all of us, and from where the rules for our work, national work and international work come, and mainly the cooperation here at OLACEF, and the TCU had the honor of being the president of OLACEF for 3 years, and there we saw the need to continue working towards the collective good, the regional good, so that we could place ourselves at a better place that the world is going through. The world is going through a huge energy transition now. And now, speaking now, after the smart words, the brilliant participation of the German ambassador here, of his smart considerations and remarks, of the honorable words of Minister José Múcio Monteiro, Mr. Albuquerque, and so this auditorium is filled up with great minds of the electrical sector, and this is a great opportunity because throughout my life, I have been able to count on brilliant minds because throughout our history in Brazil, I believe that this sector of the national life most dedicated itself to training its human resources, and I know that I'm talking to brilliant minds, intelligence above average, and that's why I have to endeavor a huge effort without going too deep into the technical aspects. And so I want to turn this into a more dynamic presentation because now I'm focusing on educational aspects. And so this coordinated auditing, coordinated by the TCU, was huge work that needed the huge work and effort of our colleagues, the heads of our organizations, the OLACEFs in Latin America. So it's work nowadays that we are sharing knowledge from Brazil to the world and with the world, and we are constantly worried about this. And we want to be in sync with the SDGs because the Federal Court of Accounts since 2015 understood this calling from the United Nations, and we endeavored a huge effort listing 145 oddities here at the TCU related to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. It was not an easy task, but I believe that our organization, our agency, held hands and endeavored this effort. And this effort should be carried out by the public and by the private sector so that in the future we're going to be able to say that at this moment of our development we have contributed for the SDGs differently from the Millennium Goals that didn't reach their that were not achieved. We're going through an emergency transition due to the climate changes, due to the need and of having sustainability in our country, in our nation, in our nations, and sustainability of our planet. And here at the TCU, we are supporting this transition, and we carried out this work related to the SDGs. But above all, we understand that the TCU can contribute so that in the near future, maybe by 2030, when the United Nations would be able to share with us everything that was carried out in the world, and so that we could measure and create parameters, measure everything that has been created and everything that was suggested to this international organization. That was a construction of a huge platform with all of the technological tools so that we could carry out a safe assessment and to tell the planet what is being done, what can be done, what hasn't been done, and what is the path into the future regarding sustainability. And so I would like to say that this would not be possible without this decisive and important support that we receive from the GIZ.
The agreement that we signed in 2016, because we know that it is a hard assessment. It is a work that needs scientific knowledge and also the experience of brother countries such as Germany and other European countries that contribute to this work. Also, I'd like to say that there is no development, Mr. Ambassador, without cooperation. It is the path of development. That's why we are here today, praising this work. Actually, another one more work of GIZ in the electric sector, because there are other works, also other works that are being developed regarding the socio-economical development of our country and our region. We know that since the Industrial Revolution, economic growth has been developed by using coal and other non-renewable energy sources. Actually, there is a study that says that if we open soybean or corn grain, inside this grain we will not only find traces of non-renewable energy, we will also find, I would say, clear signs of the importance of that moment in which the world could only sustain the development through fossil fuel-based energy sources. This model today is almost finished, and we know the coal sector and the oil sector is very strong in many countries of the world. And I know this type of source will not disappear from day to night. We know that the event that will happen in Berlin is really important because we know we're going to discuss what the control institutions are trying to do through their technical work to bring subsides, believable subsides for the countries to advance regarding this moment of the need of the incorporation in of clean sources of energy production in our energy mix. Latin America, and it, in our opinion, and it also has been mentioned here, that Latin America has very favorable conditions to walk this pathway of a more sustainable continent. Because somehow we were privileged with the natural resources that we have, the geographic position that we have, the nature that we have in our favor, and it will maybe allow us to escape from this situation of drawback and go actually to in the path of sustainability. So the control institutions in Latin America that are part of OLACEFS and NTOSAI, what can we do to contribute to the development of our peoples, the development of sustainability in our planet? I think it's a role that is not possible to be substituted by any other agency to follow up the transition of our energy mix. We know that every country has their own specificities, and we cannot propose the same model, exact model, to Ecuador, to Colombia, to Venezuela. It's something that we have to see that is important for our country to do. But we can definitely transfer technology, we can cooperate, we can interact, because the word today is not only the word of technological development, the word of sharing, or I would say the co-share. This is what we have to do now. Without this, we will not reach any other place. Our audit assessed, above all, the points that were mentioned here a little while ago regarding the guidelines and public policies, the obstacles, the legal obstacles that we have, or normative obstacles, the ability to articulate of our stakeholders, and the adaptation that we can have in the political environment, as Minister José Múcio mentioned, not only policy by itself, but energy policies. So we can understand that this adaptation of the electric power sector cannot be done overnight. Because if in Germany it's hard to stop the nuclear energy, here it is also hard for us to migrate from a sector that has an extraordinary sustainability in the production of renewable energy based in our hydroelectric power plants to the technologies that are now arising, and they are really valid, and we will talk about them in a little while. So I think that the capacity of adaptation of the society, also of the investors in the electric power sector, in our electric matrix, it is a really an important and gigantic step. The countries, the participating countries, they are not only signatories of the Paris Agreement, but also when Brazil participated at COP15, they had the contribution of the external control institution, which is this court here, TCU, and 5 large audits were implemented to provide support to the positions that Brazil would sustain in that important international event in a crucial moment for humankind with the Paris Agreement and also the commitments that we signed regarding the Sustainable Development Goals established by the United Nations. But I would like to ask you, is it really enough? Maybe you can, each of you, in your own uh, technical scientific background and your capacity to understand the problems that surround sustainability in our countries and the diversification of our energy mix, I'm sure that you will be able to answer this question much better than the Federal Court of Accounts. But our rule accepts everything, but the paper that accepts everything, but we cannot solve anything without action. And I would tell you, ladies and gentlemen, what are we waiting for? It is the question that I ask when I have the responsibility to talk about the development of information technology in our country and the efforts that TCU has done to transform Brazil into a 100% digital country. And this is exactly where we can contribute more decisively, not only with the laboratories that we have, the tools that we developed recently with our personnel and others that we acquired in foreign countries. We need to gather efforts for Brazil to provide more contributions. Not all countries, and it was clear in this audit, have very well-defined targets and plans. I would say that was very well mentioned by the ambassador of Germany, because many countries, not all countries, have the capacity for planning, which was actually forgotten in our continent in the past 40 or 50 years. So Brazil really needs to recover this planning, including the way of using the natural resources such as water. So we really need to stop and think how we can use the available natural resources. So I think that we see in this chart the possibility of advancements. So each country, when they dedicate more or less in this joint effort for regional development. And the analogy that I bring to you is an analogy that really touches me deeply, because I started as a football supporter when I was a boy, supporting Flamengo, because only the Rio de Janeiro radio stations would reach the small village where I grew up. So Flamengo was already this national passion that we see today. So I think that with all respect to the other teams, because I really love the team of Bahia, but I have to mention that football is bringing an example to us. The Brazilian football is a world exponent that has been a champion for many times, has worked very hard for their restructuring. And I'm sure that we see today the Brazilian football, there is a lack of planning, teams without coaches, other teams with no game tactics, and many of them don't even know if they are really kicking into the goal or not. So it is back to our area. We need to really rethink the way we work. So what happened in the World Cup in Brazil maybe happened because we don't have it as the German. We were not really attentive to use the technology information tools that were available for the use also in the sports area, as it happens in the tragic World Cup in Brazil. Tragic because we lost, but we know that Germany won it for its merits, and the whole press would say that the German coach was using big data knowledge. So it's important for us to understand the need for restructuring and reorganization. I would say that in the meantime, the world is watching, perplexed, the climate changes. And it brings us a very clear idea of this exhaustion of the model that we have, only using accumulation dams for production of electricity, because it has a limit. As a matter of fact, I would like to remind you that when I was a congressman, I could take a delegation of congressmen to Germany to have to visit the energy production area. At that time, when we discussed with the German society, they demanded us for in Brazil, because in Brazil we didn't have other alternatives for clean energy production, such as the wind um, energy production. And just to remember that year, I think it was around 1996, between 1996 and 2002, we knew that this area didn't have a lot of technological development. Germany had only two uh, power plants of generators with a low productivity, energy productivity. So when we started in 85 with generators producing 50 kilowatts of energy per hour, today our generators, since the year 2000, we have generators that have an extraordinary production volume of around 2,500 kilowatts, and we have the perspective of reaching 7,000. So something that was a limitation for the import of this technology, and it was kept in Brazil for many years, the representatives of these two factories, I mean these two power plants, they couldn't have a voice in the government to talk about this topic. And the first wind farms that were approved by the Brazilian government were lost regarding development, regarding investment for many years. So back to football, I'm going to use the team of Flamengo as an example. So this was the situation that passed and of a team, as well as in the situation of general energy generation and energy transmission, also has to develop. These are the involved stakeholders with the topic of renewable energy, and they are currently with the need of an extreme reflection and replanning of what we have done so far. And what prevents us to do this? Above all, in the case of Brazil, in the case of many countries that we saw in this coordinated audit, we don't have enough articulation, coordination, and some of these agencies don't even participate in the discussion. So Flamengo showed us that there is no crisis that cannot be overcome. And in a short time, this gigantic growth was verified in less than 1 year in the case of the Flamengo team. We need, above all, leadership, seriousness, good investment, a lot of work, and team spirit. Today, we need to think on changing this switch once and for all. And in this switch changing, we are in the moment that the Gardner Group is proposing to the technological world this disruptive action of each one of us to incorporate in the electric sector the knowledge that are available in this moment, in which they created the equilibrium, the expression called equilibrium is the equilibrium between the technological advances and the productive sector. We need to think that it is the moment of the tech balance, or the equilibrium. I think that we need to update our energy mix really quickly with the same energy that Flamengo fought for the title. Unfortunately, the audit that we carried out, and also our partners from Latin America, showed us that we still have a long path to cross, but this path can be shortened very much, which means that we expect that we will soon start and move quickly, because fortunately we see that the technology of information technology and new technologies that are arising in the renewable energy area. For example, the wind batteries, the air batteries that are being studied in Switzerland, near the tunnel of Saint Gothard. They are important world examples of what we know. And also, as it was mentioned earlier, the energy efficiency. The expansion of the distributed and the advancements of distribution are good, but we need to advance in the possibility of the sustainability of the energy sector, renewable energy sector. Maybe this technology that is developed in Switzerland will not represent the future batteries, so that the system will not be a victim of the highs and lows in the energy production, in the tidal and wind and solar sources, because we cannot dominate the winds and the clouds. But we really can optimize the sector by using these batteries. Not only the lithium batteries that enable the grant of the Nobel Prizes to the scientists that study this topic, but above all, the issue of the use of new technologies for a better sustainability in the renewable energy sector, for a better energy efficiency.
And finally, I would like to say that the future is here, because the demands, they are ever growing, as it was mentioned before. And so now we have electric cars arriving and autonomous cars, and also many other advances that are going to require ever cheaper and cleaner sources of energy in the mobility sector. And so this is a demand and something that grows every day. And we know that this is a responsibility that belongs to all of us. I would say that in the city of Washington, since 2016, new technologies have been used in the field of information technology, and there is a 30% economy in the energy when they distribute energy. So I ask you, why isn't Brazil doing that? Because we have a model that places this regulation and this burden on top of all of the advances, and also on top of the Brazilian consumers. We cannot have a country that would like to continue being an exporter of food to the world if our system is inefficient, ineffective, and like in my hometown. And in my hometown, there are some people who have never seen a light bulb. So we need to endeavor this effort. We need to reassess and assess this work. You have to do that. The entire government has to do that, so that we can have this advance that is essential for human lives, so that this can be made available to all Brazilians in all of its regions. I believe that this is the biggest challenge ahead of us. High quality energy, low cost energy in the cities and in the countryside. So this is a responsibility of all of us. The future is here. The future is here. And so we need to move forward and also ensure that all of us are going to be ready for the big challenges. Thank you very, very much, and I congratulate all of you, and I wish you all a wonderful event. Thank you, Justice Haroldo Cedras. And now we're going to start the panel. Sustainable Development Goals and also the Paris Agreement and the expansion of renewable energies. We would like to form the panel. The journalist specialized in finance and economics, founder of My News, an innovative and independent channel on YouTube, and her name is Maria Luque. She's going to be the moderator of this panel. We would like to invite the Task Manager, Mr. Asher Lessos from the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, to be a part of the panel. Senior Associate of Energiewende, Mr. Philip Hauser, and Mr. Luis Barroso, and also the professor from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Mr. Carlos Battle. And so the questions, they can be asked via the Menti virtual platform, and access should be carried out by the website www.menti.com. Use the access code 745257 to send your questions. Optionally, we're going to have pieces of paper which you're going to be able to use to ask your questions. Please take your seats. I would like to pass the floor to the moderator of this panel, Ms. Mara Luque. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation of the TCU to take part in this event at a moment in which the news placed Brazil in a moment that Brazil is considered to be totally disconnected from the scientific world, from the climate change. Listening the ambassador of Germany talking about this partnership and the advance of the projects between Brazil and Germany, listening, hearing that the TCU is so involved in this, in a forum for the debate of this topic, and people who are working with this topic so closely. And for me as a journalist, this is a great honor, great joy to have this opportunity from drinking from this knowledge fountain. And so this is a world problem. This is a huge challenge, which is the growth, the economic growth, respecting the environment, and mainly, as we heard before, we started hearing here, enjoying the opportunities that are available, because we talk a lot about the environmental issue, and that the environmental issue is something that goes against economic growth. So every time some people discuss this, they talk about environmental problems, they always say that the economic growth is an antagonist when it comes to the protection of the environment, and also it hinders the improvement of the quality of life of our population. And no, it's the other way around. There is a possibility of having economic growth, more jobs can be created. I live in Costa Rica. Well, I spend most of my days there. And Costa Rica is totally in sync with the protection of the environment, and this has not hindered its economic growth. And they enjoy all the opportunities generated, even though Costa Rica is a small country. So for me, it's a great joy and a great honor. Thank you, TCU, for this invitation. So it's good to know that the Brazilian agencies are worried about this, and they have not lost focus. So each panelist is going to speak for 10 to 15 minutes, and then we're going to open the floor to questions, and then I'm going to place this. We're going to start with Mr. Asher Lessos. He's going to carry out his presentation. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you. First of all, I would like to thank TCU for this invitation to be here with you, talking on behalf of the United Nations. Can you please put my presentation there? Okay, thank you. Today, I'm going to discuss three main issues regarding this topic. Mainly, the main idea of my presentation today is to talk about how today and why today is important. Why is it important to think about this transition that we are trying to have so that we can have an economy that is low on carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. So first, I'm going to talk about the sciences behind climate changes. All of us know the situation well. But I'm going to use the current sciences to talk about the seriousness of the situation. The sciences are telling us that we're moving towards a disaster. So we have to take a look at these opportunities, these advances around the world so that we can face this transition. In second place, I'm going to talk about international cooperation, the countries together, the international community within the United Nations so that we can face the situation together. And finally, I'm going to talk about a publication that was issued today, carried out by the United Nations, talking about the differences of what we're doing nowadays and what we have to do so that we can achieve the goals and not allow the temperature of the planet to go up 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. I'm going to start using a picture from my country. I'm from Australia. This picture was taken last week of the bushfires that are happening in Australia. Huge fires that are happening now. And so the government of Australia a few years ago created a system to be able to measure the size of the fires, the bushfires, the wildfires. But this wildfire is above all of the categories that we have ever had. It's beyond that. It's huge. So we have always had wildfires, and we're always going to have them. But due to climate changes, the frequency of these fires and also the size of these fires are becoming larger and larger. And we know that this has also been happening in Brazil and in the region and also in the Caribbean. Talking about the increase of the world temperature. What are we talking about? This is a chart that was created by NASA, and that shows the difference in temperature regarding the average historical temperature between 1888 and 2017. So in blue, they have a temperature that is lower than the average temperature. And in orange, yellow, and red, we have places that have a higher temperature than what the temperature was in 1884. 2017 was one of the hottest years in our history, in humankind's history. What is the difference? The difference is alarming. It's huge. And this is what we're seeing. And so in the years now, we're seeing an increase in the temperatures. And this chart is not uniform. The increase is not uniform. So in some places, we are already seeing increases in 3-4 degrees in temperature. And so there are differences. So it's different than only an increase of 1 degree. And what is also interesting, and the sciences are unanimous when it comes to this. This chart here shows the measures of many scientific organizations in the world regarding global mean temperatures. So we have different countries, and different countries are reaching the same conclusions. So we have a Japanese organization, a European organization, an American organization, and the conclusions they are arriving at are the same. And so now in 2019, the temperature has increased 1 degree. And in other places around the world, this is even higher than 1 degree. Why? Because we are having an increase in the greenhouse effect gases. And this is a chart. that Mr. Auger, in his documentary, he mentioned this, and he shows that the concentration of the greenhouse gases are above any level in the last 400,000 years in our planet. Where are the emissions coming from? They come from many sectors. And so here we have a profile of the emissions of the greenhouse gases. And what is interesting to see, it's since the it's increasing its participation. It's good to have the seminar now because it's a sector that is increasing its emissions. So it has gone over 25% of the emissions. So over 25% of the emissions come from the electrical sector. Even though Brazil is considered to be a clean sector, Brazil is considered to have a clean sector. So within this context, it was very important to take this topic to the world community. And why is it important? It is important because the emissions, they do not remain on top of a single country. When you talk about the destruction of the environment, maybe the emissions are going to stay there. But if you emit greenhouse gases here in Brazil, it can travel to other nations. It can travel around the world. So it is impossible to have a single solution or a single solution, because countries that don't do anything, they can enjoy the benefits of other countries. And so this was discussed for the first time in 1988 during the UN General Assembly, and since then they created the Climate Convention of the United Nations. And so yearly the countries, they consider the sciences and to discuss this topic. And so the most important event of the global community to face the climate changes was the Paris Agreement, and this took place in 2015 when the agreement was adopted. It was an agreement adopted by all of the countries in the world, and I was inside this room when this event took place, and it was a happy moment. The world was together to avoid climate changes. But we agreed upon this, so now we have to do it. We have to implement it. We have to take action so that we can respect the agreement. What were the main decisions of the agreement? I would like to emphasize the three most important. So within the Paris Agreement, everybody agreed to limit the increase of temperature to less than 2 degrees Celsius, closer to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And what does this mean? We must reduce emissions. The second most important was to support the developing countries so that they could adjust themselves to the climate change effects. And finally, we need to provide funding to the developing countries so that they can do more. And in this region, what can we do? How can we find solutions? And so that we can stop burning fossil fuels. When we talk about the SDGs and the 2030 agenda, from my perspective, we're talking about all of the SDGs regarding climate change. But when we talk about the reduction of emissions, we're talking mostly about SDG 7, 11, 13, and 15. So we have sustainable and also climate action, and so also life and land, life on land. And in this last part, I would like to talk about the difference between what we're doing and what we must do. This is a publication that discusses the emissions gap report of 2019, and it was published today. It is called the Emissions Gap Report, and each year the UN publishes this report to analyze the difference between what we're doing and what we should be doing or we must do. And so first, the difference, the emissions gap is greater than ever. And what does this mean? Instead of diminishing the emissions so that we can meet the goals, we are going the opposite direction. We are farther away from our goal. And there is new evidence that the countries, we are not doing enough. And so the increase in the emissions last year was about 2%. There was a 2% increase. We have to reduce every year now. We have to reduce the emissions by 7% every year so that we can achieve the goal and not increase the temperature of the planet. And finally, and so the last one, the key is to use renewable energies and also to promote energy efficiency jointly with the electrification of the final uses. And so renewable energy instead of other polluting energies. And this is happening. I'm going to discuss Costa Rica now. By the way, I'm traveling to Costa Rica tonight. And so they already have a clean energy mix and energy matrix. And so they have a clean matrix, and they also combine the clean energy sources. And you can download the publication. It's very, very interesting, okay? And it shows the context that we are facing now. A little bit more about this report. As you can see, the commitments of each country and the contributions of each country. And so it says that, so conditional, the contributions of each country. And this is what they aim to do so that they can meet the goals established by the Paris Agreement.
But in summary, all these contributions will bring an increase in the temperature of 3.2 degrees. This chart is very interesting, and I found it a few days ago. It's from the executive director of Postman Institute. They carried out a study to measure the ice, the trees, to measure the temperature and the concentration of heat. In the past 3 million years, we never went to above the temperature average of 2 degrees. We went to -3 degrees and now 2. So it's not really an option that we have to go above 2 degrees or to reach 5 degrees. So we need to ensure that we're going to have a planet for the next generations that is safe and healthy. What can we do to reach the 2-degree world? We need to be 2 times more ambitious. We need to have 3 times the work we're doing, and to reach the world that is harder than 2 degrees, we need to be 5 times more ambitious. I'm showing you all this sad news to you because today we're looking at the opportunities that we have. So we're going to have positive news, hopefully, in the future. My conclusions now. The science says that we are on the pathway to disaster and we need to change this route. We still have time, but little time. We need to move now. We need to do something now. The minister said, why wait? So we cannot wait. And lastly, Latin America and the Caribbean, the energy sector is really key. The renewable energy and energy efficiency has to be connected with the electrification of the final users. Thank you so much. What called my attention in your presentation is that you mentioned points that show the renewable energy data, how we advanced in the energy matrix, in the renewable sources, and we in fact see an increase in the gas emission. It shows the importance of following up this debate because the complexity is really large. You can work with some simplistic news that make the problem not seem so serious, but it actually is very serious. Now, Mr. Hauser, the floor is yours. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the invitation again. And I was requested to provide a summary of renewable energy in the world, in Germany, and in Latin America in 10 minutes. So please prepare. Well, first, today work in an organization called Agora Energiewenden. We have technology resources that allow us to discuss the energy transition without any economical or political interests. We contributed to the discussion in Germany, in Europe, and also with our partners all around the world. Today we have a program in Brazil called MI Energy Dialogues, and also in Mexico with the Climate Initiative of Mexico. And we are creating a portal of information of studies for Latin America as a whole, because we understand that this continent is crucial in the global energy transition. What is this so-called global energy transition? We heard a lot about climate issues, and we need to look at also at the opportunities. We have technologies today that are increasingly cheaper. We have wind power, LED batteries. All these technologies they have reduced the costs. But technology is not all. In Latin America, we need to have resources. We already have resources for quality of energy to apply these technologies. To apply the technologies, we need to understand that they are completely different to the traditional generation technologies. Here, it is all investment allocated, and once this structure is built, it will provide the energy with very low cost. It's like almost free energy. The countries that can build this energy infrastructure with the renewable fundamentals, they will have prosperity in the long term aspect. Looking at the point of view of distribution and management, they are distributed. We need to develop the technologies in the regions of our countries, and we've heard about the variability. But when we have access to wind, sun, biomass, hydropower, this variability can be managed very well, and it doesn't represent a problem that we have, for example, in Europe. What is important is that the effectiveness and efficiency of the system depends on a good planning and a good market model, and then we can reduce the economical and environmental cost of this new integrated system for distributed resources. We also mentioned the importance of electrifying the economy as a whole. Today in Brazil, and I think Latin America as a whole, electricity only represents 17% of our energy consumption. We talk about electricity, but in fact, it still represents little. We need to use this renewable energy source, in the case of Costa Rica and Brazil, to electrify transportation, electrify the industry, and our urban centers, and then move the fossil fuels that are not only more expensive in the point of view of production, but also they have very serious impact in the environment and health and public health. I like this chart very much because we can see the low participation of electricity in the broad consumption. Once we go to the energy use through electricity, we have this potential of energy efficiency that's really big, because the electric car is 2 times more efficient than uh, a car by conventional fuels. So the thermoelectric plants, they have 40%, while the renewable energy sources, they have 90% of efficiency. So the renewable energy generates more efficiency, so the consumption will fall, and we're going to have an economic benefit. But it demands more renewable energy for us to promote this substitution. Lastly, it also implies that the abundance of low-cost renewable energy, as well as the new technologies for exploration of oil and gas, will make the fossil fuels to become cheaper. And there's a risk that we allocate a lot of capital in the old technologies. The risk for us not to change our approach is to generate the sunk assets. So it's important to reorientate our investments. Another opportunity that is observed here is the hydrogen chain. Let me breathe. I think I spoke too fast. I will have a. I will take a little bit of my time. So what I want to show you here is that there is a bigger demand of capital. We need to use 13 additional trillion of dollars, and it means an investment of 90 trillions in of dollars in renewable energy. And this reallocation of capital is a very complex process, because it's necessary for us to reach the benefits that they are an expansion of GDP in the global growth in about 2.5% for 2050. We see that the renewable energy, if they're well designed, if your electric system can substitute the fossil fuels, they will bring environmental and social benefits, and also economic benefits. Now, looking at Latin America, we have a continent that has a lack of economical growth, and it's very unequal. So we need to mobilize investment to make the economy growth, so we can grow, so we can distribute income to the people. How can we do that in a moment in which we need to increase investments? Here we have a projection of what is this panorama of energy transition in Latin America. It is an investment of $4 trillion in the region for the renewable energy solutions, which is about 40% of GDP in this region. It is relatively smaller compared to the rest of the world, because the renewable energy here are much more efficient. In addition, we have the potential of expanding the participation of renewable energy in the gross energy consumption compared to the rest of the world. In Brazil, we already have 45%, but the tendency is to go above 70% of the participation of renewable energy in the gross energy consumption. Regarding the renewable energy, the continent can go above 90% of the participation of renewable energy generation. We can use these new technologies to provide an economic shock in the region and to provide the diversification of the renewable energy sources and reallocate the costs and investments in a more distributed way in the economy of the countries. And lastly, of course, we have here countries that depend on the import of fossil fuels, as there are others that depend on the export. So the decrease in fossil fuels will bring benefits for the ones who reduce the export, but there's a need of a fair transition for the countries that export the fossil fuels. On the other hand, as I mentioned, hydrogen, we have the possibility to produce and export these new fuels, the hydrogen and electric fuels. As Latin America has a great opportunity in the scenario of decarbonization and global energy transition, and also I'd like to bring the vision of the pillars of that. Of course, the renewable energy potential using this diversified amount of renewable energies, the investment environment to enable the large volumes of capital at low cost, and to regulate the energy system to minimize the systems in the system.
And finally, and this is very important in a region that has so much social injustice, is to ensure that these entrepreneurships, they're going to be received by the communities. And I would like to share an illustration from Mexico, much more of an example, because I'm convinced that we are very similar. If we start mapping the marginalized regions where we have a high level of poverty, a low human development, and if we overlap first with the indigenous lands, and then those that have a hydro potential, wind potential, solar potential, biomass potential, and geothermal potential, we can see that these valuable resources of renewable energies, they are exactly at the places where we have a huge social development problem. And so in order for us to be able to develop these resources with environmental responsibility, but as a way of promoting social development, we have a huge a possibility of overcoming needs and the traditional development, the linear development in which there is the exploration of fossil fuels that move the economy, so that in the end we can have social expenditures, and this should be substituted by a circular investment, that the investment in renewable energy is already going to promote development, reduce the energy costs, and it's going to improve the income, the consumption of the economy as a whole. So this is my contribution to the discussion. Thank you for the invitation in this time, and let's go. I would like to highlight 2 points of Dr. Hauser's presentation. He talks about the importance for social development, and this is true. In Costa Rica, I'm now living there to carry out some research, and I have a house, I kind of live there. I coexist with the people in Costa Rica. I'm there following their daily lives, and I can see this, how they enjoy the environmental issue. The environmental issue is part of everyone's life, and this would be wonderful to reduce poverty and to reduce costs. What you mentioned, this is amazing, because in the households, the electricity bills, they are not a problem. Electrical energy is not a problem for the residents. For them, it's really cheap. And also healthcare, because sometimes we only think about the environmental issues, but it's amazing the impact that this has on healthcare. So Costa Rica has retirees from all over the world, and they live there because public healthcare is really good, and the cost of private healthcare is cheap. And the public healthcare is cheap because of this environmental concern. And environmental concern promotes better health for people. And this impacts the healthcare services less, and this offers high quality services. So now we're going to listen to Mr. Carlos Baro.
Bom dia. Lamentavelmente não falo português.
Infelizmente, so people told me that I can speak Spanish. People told me that I can speak Spanish. Because unfortunately, I do not
Yo quería,
speak
no sé si,
Portuguese. So well,
como
between
en primer
Spanish
lugar,
and
me parece que todo lo
Spanish,
importante
I would choose
que
to
yo
speak
puedo contar
Spanish.
ya
So
se ha dicho en
everything
las
that
dos
is important
presentaciones
and that I
anteriores,
can discuss. And so in the previous
porque
presentations, they
realmente
have
lo que
already
tenemos todos
discussed
claros es que
everything I
tenemos
had
una urgencia
listed
y
to
tenemos que
discuss.
hacer cosas para
Because it's
cambiar
clear
el
to us that
planeta.
it's urgent, it's an emergency,
Y
and
entonces
we
quería
have to
dejar
work
una serie de
together to
mensajes
save the
inicialmente en los dos
planet and to
primeros
change
minutos.
the
Ese
planet.
soy yo.
So I would like to
No,
share some messages with you in the
no es
first few
esa.
minutes.
I am afraid, hold on. Perdón, ha habido un problema con la de ayer. Bien, una serie de mensajes rápidos en 2 minutos y luego ya el resto será repetir lo mismo. En primer lugar, necesitamos desarrollar energías renovables. En el mundo eso va a traer una serie de problemas que pasaré a contar ahora, pero que afortunadamente las buenas noticias es que no son tan problemas en Brasil. Brasil es un entorno privilegiado en el que hay un potencial renovable enorme y los potenciales problemas que pueden surgir de la expansión de las renovables en Brasil, en otros países, aquí no van a ocurrir.
In other countries, Brazil is not going to have the same problem. And so we have inherited this from other countries. We listen this from other countries. So there is a cost for this renovation. And so via using renewable energy, we're going to be able to generate electricity. Well, and Brazil is privileged when it comes to this. And so, my opinion, what we need to do in Brazil is simply to use, well, the investments and the money that they can invest. And so you can invest in many things, and you should try to avoid defects in the regulations, defects in the electrical sector, so that you're not going to lose or waste investments done in other countries, such as the country I live in and work at in the USA, and like my friend Philip Hauser in Germany. In these other countries, we need to invest much more than in Brazil. So thank God, Germany in first place, they're doing us a favor by investing in the technology, so when it comes here, it's going to arrive here at a lower price. And so this is my first message. I believe that it's important and urgent to do in Brazil the following: to avoid errors, to avoid mistakes in the regulation, so that you're not going to waste the money or lose the money. This would be my main message. And so very briefly, in 4 minutes, I'm going to show to you what's happening in other countries. And I'm just going to discuss the things that we should worry about. I'm not only talking about Brazil, but every single country around the world. First of all, what were the RES penetration impacts on most power systems? This is my introduction. Why is the European Union investing so much on energy, on trying to have self-sufficiency? Because they have a huge energy dependence, and this has to change. There is an environmental concern, and the other thing that is important, because they have energy dependence on a single source. And so in Europe, this is very serious. And so we have many drivers in the European Union, and we have to speed up the process. And there are many objectives, and these slides are a little old, so we need to advance along a way that is a complex way. And at the same time, we're trying to develop the technology. We're trying to find good solutions, okay? And these are the EU emission targets. As I mentioned before, as Philip had mentioned before, we have 60%. 60% is, so we have to reduce the emissions in all of these sectors here on the slide. And so the key is the power sector, the energy sector. And so the emissions are higher in the power sector, and we have to reduce that. So what is happening in a few countries? And so this renewable penetration, you can see in green. You can see the evolution of the installed capacity and the peak demand on the left-hand side, and you have the demand coverage on the right-hand side. And so they were thinking about producing this for the next 40 years, but there were funding problems in these countries. And so in Germany, so we have renewable energy in green, and so we have solar energy in yellow. And as Philip mentioned, this represents a huge share of the market. So this is the economic dispatch and the spot prices. And so sometimes the wind does not blow, and then they had to use thermal energy. So how can we fund thermal power plants if they are only going to be used during a few periods of time? This is a problem we have in many countries. Other problems in the state of California, for instance, the solar penetration. And we can see the duck curve here on this chart. This is the daily demand, and that we have to produce with thermal energy. And so this is being complemented by solar energy. And so we have the flexibility, and so we have a huge curve here in thermal energy. And so all of these all of these problems, these happen in the morning. So all of these problems, they end up increasing the prices. The same thing, unpredictability is a big problem. And we have the wind forecasting for 1 week in Belgium. This is what's happening in Belgium. And what can we foresee regarding the future? And so we're going to have a huge reduction of prices for the production of solar energy. And so we are reaching a balance point. And the important thing is, if there is no problem, the storage problem and the cost of this technology is way lower than any other investment. I understand, And so the message from the other countries is the concern that they have with the cost. The costs are going to increase because of the lack of capacity to store the energy. Okay, but this is not going to be a problem in Brazil for the next 100 years. And so why is the topic of the battery so important? Because in countries with thermal power plants, there is a huge weight, a huge reduction of cost of these batteries, these 4-hour batteries. This is a chart for the next years, and I'm also very optimistic when it comes to this. I am optimistic that we're going to have a reduction of the lithium batteries, because the reduction of the prices of these batteries is not going to impact the electrical sector, but also solar panels. And also the cell phone market is worried about that, the cars that use these batteries. And so I believe in human beings, and I believe that we're going to have better solutions. But all of these problems are associated to what does Brazil want to do? What do you have the capacity? What kind of capacity do you want to have? You do not need to worry about the secondary effects of using renewable energy. So in Europe, we have a chart of the wind output between September and October of 2015 and throughout the entire European continent. So you have whole weeks, entire weeks that the wind is not blowing anywhere. And so they have to cover or make up for this lack of wind. That's why they have to use batteries. South America is a privileged place in the world because of all of the natural resources that they have. And South America has a huge wind potential and a huge solar potential. And this is also my first message. The focus in South America, as well as in Brazil or in Colombia or in other countries here in the region, you shouldn't worry so much regarding the costs that the technology can bring to you. But what are the costs that we can diminish? Oh, no, sorry. What are the costs that we can increase due to mistakes or errors, or if the system is not developed correctly because of ineffectiveness? And here in Brazil, and so you need to be able to handle the problems, okay? And this is where I wanted to arrive at. So is the future going to be distributed? We don't know yet. We don't know yet. What we know is that the future must be integrated. The future must be integrated using conventional energy with the distribution and the renewable energy, and we have to complement all of them and coordinate all of them and join all of them. And so I have been working for 30 years with this, and so the key to everything is having good regulation. I don't want to go over my time, but I'm just going to leave 4 main messages. So where is the main concern in the world? First of all, the main objective should be to update electricity markets design. And the European Union is learning a lot. And they are using market design models. They are trying to have a European market model that is going to optimize the economy, that the regulation is correct, that when people have to produce the hydroelectrical power plants, they're going to be well designed. This is one of the steps. And they're trying to maximize the efficiency in the economic dispatch. And so Brazil dove deep into the ONS so that it can be a more participative process, and so that the stakeholders can understand why things are happening. They can improve the prices, trying to give more transparency to the system so that the prices can show the efficiency of the system and the stakeholders can react to these changes. So this is one of the objectives, to improve the efficiency of the economic dispatch, to enforce transparency and replicability, and to have the participation of the DERs. Second place, to involve all of us who are here in the problem. And so sending the right signals to the consumers, and to have a cost-reflective prices and charges, so that we can improve the efficiency of our air conditioners, so that we can electrify our households, our companies. This is the path ahead. And what we need is a cost-reflective price and charge, saying that the prices can be higher at certain moments during the day. And this would cost money, and we need to maybe charge your vehicles during the night, because the electricity is going to be cheaper during the night. So we have to develop and improve the electrical tariffs. And so we need to enhance the distribution regulation to enable a more efficient expansion of the system at low voltage level, to enable the development of more efficient and innovative distribution utility business models. We need to have a TOT-X and output-based regulation. We need to have incentives for longer-term innovation and demonstration projects, and we need non-wire alternatives, okay? Integrate the DERs as a solution to expand the distribution networks, okay? And so sometimes in the past, the more we spent, the more they use the money. And the last message is we have to revisit the industry structure, to change the structure, so that the distributors, they are going to be effective and efficient, and they're going to become facilitators. And we have to ask one another, how can we separate the two jobs that they have, so that there are not going to be conflicts, okay? Okay? I don't want to go beyond my time, because my time is up. And what I wanted to share with you is thank you for the invitation, thank you for your attention, and we're going to continue debating on the panel. Batley began talking about how important it is to have good regulation in order not to waste money, and then he goes back and he says how important it is to have high quality regulation and transparency. Well, I am a journalist, and I work writing about the economy and the market, and the investors, they always say the same. When we ask them, what is more important to attract investment in Brazil? The regulatory agencies. They are not worried about the minister. They are not focused on the minister. The regulatory agency is more important, and they are more important than knowing who the ministers are. And so it's not only in the sector, the energy sector, but in any sector to attract investments. This is essential. And so now I'm going to pass the floor to the next member of the panel. Is it working? So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's wonderful to be here with you. And I'm the last one on the panel, and so I chose not to create a PowerPoint presentation, because I knew that everything that I was going to say would have been mentioned by the previous speakers. So I organized a presentation, but I had to change it about 8 times, okay? That's why I was on the cell phone, because everything that I had chosen to say was said by another person. So before speaking, I would like to thank the TCU for the invitation, Thank you, Manuel. Thank you for the organization, the work that you have been carrying out. I had the opportunity to work with the TCU before. I interacted with the TCU when I was at the EPE, and I was there. And so the dialogue was always highly technical. And now it's a great pleasure to be here with all of you in the seminar. So Carlos and Philip.
O Asher fez uma apresentação que eu vou citar bastante também. Então eu vou tentar na minha fala trazer pouquinho.
And so I was trying to promote this debate in Brazil and to bring it to Brazil, and also adjusting my presentation with everything that we heard before. Gently, I would just like you to set the chronometer, because if you don't set the chronometer, I'm going to speak for 18 hours, but I'm going to try to control myself. But I'm going to have to remove my glasses. Okay, thank you.
Well, very easily saying, I think the world, by the reasons that Asher mentioned of the challenges of global warming, the world started in this wave of goals and targets for renewable energy sources, because the world in general, big part of it, they generate energy by fossil fuels. So the electric sector could have the contribution for the decarbonization. The most famous case was the 2020. It was for the European Union to have 20% of renewable energy sources by 2020. So it was the premium tariffs and the feed-in tariffs that were subsidized, that provided by the renewable energy distributors by the policies. This process was carried out for many years in Europe, and in Brazil there was a questioning on why Brazil didn't have any target or a goal for the penetration of renewable energy sources. And the answer was that because Brazil had the energy mix that was mainly hydropower driven, the current situation in Brazil was the one that many countries would like to reach in many decades. So it was a source of questioning, because Germany had the goal, Spain had the goal, but this process kept going, and then throughout the time the process started to be called the growth of renewables and the growth of targets motivated by the need of acting and doing something. And as Asher mentioned, that we need to do something for the planet. And this process was finally named energy transition, in a very well-defined concept. The countries that have a fossil-based energy matrix, they could reach a cleaner matrix, neutral in carbon and 100% decarbonized. The energy transition in Brazil was badly defined, because Brazil was already in a point in which you could say Brazil has done the energy transition in the electricity sector. In the process of Brazil having a very clean energy matrix, and the profile of emissions that is quite different from the emission profile of other countries. In Brazil, as a rule of thumb, 30% of the emissions come from the energy and 70% from other sectors such as deforestation, agriculture, the soil change. So we had the design of the targets that were signed by Brazil in the Paris Agreement. In Brazil, in the Agreement of Paris, they had a plan for 2020 applied by the economy as a whole, not applied by a specific segment of the economy, because Brazil has different options to adopt, economically efficiently speaking, to reach the target. So as a byproduct of this target, that's the only obligation that Brazil has. Okay, guys, even reading the audit report, I read it carefully, and one of the intention protocols of Brazil is to increase the penetration of renewable energies for 20% of the energy matrix by 2030. So these are intentions, not goals. So it brought a lack of understanding, but it has an economical logic, because when we think of cost benefit, it seems to be clear, more less expensive to have the changes, not in the energy sector, but in other economic sectors, which is not easy. The easiest part is the electric sector. This process in Brazil started to generate a little bit of confusion while the world was introducing a more formal concept of energy transition. The energy transition ended up having, in a decentralized way, a process of world energy transformation. Myself, for example, I've been using the words energy transformation, energy transition, because many countries that don't have the energy transition as a very defined narrative, they are benefiting from the world energy transformation that is happening, which causes the reduction in equipment and the concerns in consumption, as Carlos mentioned. And this transformation is irreversible. It doesn't matter if you use this speech of transformation or not. And the energy transformation generated an energy business, because the renewable energy became a business, and this business involves money and profit, and it started pushing other new public policies for the renewable energy to become a main actor only by economic reasons. Brazil was a leader in this agenda in last decade, when Brazil started having the auctions for the renewable energies that brought very low results than the public policies based in feed-in tariffs and premium tariffs. So these processes started to advance with Brazil not having a goal for the penetration of renewable energies. And then we fast forward for today, and we see the renewable energy being a reality and the renewables being a challenge for the system. Such challenges have been covered by the presentation of Carlos and Philip, and I will try to bring to you how I think Brazil is positioning now. A challenge that Brazil has, and it's not only here in Brazil, is to address the impact of the renewable energy sources in the management of the system and improvement of regulation, so that Brazil can insert more and more renewable sources. Brazil has done homework, and I had the pleasure to contribute with the former executive secretary of Ministry of Energy, Paulo Pedrosa. He's sitting right there, in the public consultancy that had the first pillar of a bridge that will do the transition to the world, containing the ingredients that Carlos described in his presentation. All those ingredients, they are the spine, they are the structure of the policies that will make the renewable sources more valuable in the system, and then they could have more efficient options to offer technologies and services for the planning, focusing on price. I think the material Carlos presented has to do with this consultation, because what we wrote in that material was taken from best world literature, which is the literature of the institutions such as MIT. And there's a question that it's always present. And I'm just about to finish my talk. The question is, in a country that has so much facilitation on integrating renewable energy, a country that has the chance to be the leader in the electrification of economy and a low carbon perspective, we can have an electric matrix that is 100% renewable. Can we have that? Can we have an energy matrix that can be more renewable? And what is the role of the public policies in this context? I will bring 4 provocations to you, and I will talk based in the report of public policies done by TCU. We have to do the public policies, but we need to study the cost benefit of that policy. Otherwise, it will become an additional cost to the consumers. So just to have a provocation for you, today many European countries and countries around the world are increasing their targets for penetration of renewable energy from 20 to 30%. In Denmark, it's 40%, Australia as well. And the emissions resulting from the electric sector in 2018 increased, even with these targets being growing. So the public policies need to consider the cost-benefit relation. The degree of emissions in 8 years was the American cars, the SUVs. They have 200 million units of these cars in the world, so they are responsible for the emissions of greenhouse gases. So we need to look at the transportation sector. So the cost benefit of the public policies have to be done, and the public policy can be used to identify the value leverages. Brazil has, for example, the potential of integrating renewables as an asset of flexibility to complement between the hydroelectric and a portfolio done by the solar and wind. But for that, we need to determine the value of the transmission, and the companies cannot do that because they do not represent the system of generation in the representativeness. So we cannot do this analysis in a detailed way. So I failed greatly at EPE, the energy research company that I represent. So another thing that we can do, targets. The TCU report talks about the explicit targets for the penetration of renewable energy sources. So in the context of the public consultation number 33 and talking with Paulo Pedrosa, we would say that there's no sense to have a target for the electric sector. We can have a target for decarbonization for the whole energy sector, and each sector would communicate with the ministers to reach these goals. And then the clean energy could be a trading product for exporting, including. This process was proposed in the public consultation 33 and is a market mechanism that we think it's a winner, with a clear direction for the investors of the goals of reduction of CO2 in the country. Step 3, the battles that Brazil will face, the role of renewable energy versus nuclear energy, renewable energy versus natural gas. So the nuclear energy became a public policy choice in Brazil. Is it the most efficient one? I don't know, but I had some calculation that the Angra 3 power plant, the nuclear plant, is cheaper for the consumer to exchange the equivalent of this power plant in solar energy, even including the costs that solar energy can pay because of the intermittence, the subside financing, but it's an interesting transition. In that segment, we have to substitute of what there is currently by solar. It can be interesting by the consumer, and it was shown in a study of the Scolia Institute. Now, natural gas. Is there a space for natural gas in the energy mix? Yes, but depends on the price. There's a price from which it's more economic to substitute the natural gas by the solar wind portfolio, because this portfolio, together with hydropower, can provide the attributes that the system needs. We also did the calculation, and the price is around $5 in the thermoelectric power plant. So it's important to have the numbers to improve the decision making in terms of public policies. So these numbers are really important. And lastly, I would like to talk about the actions on the side of the offer, but there are actions in the demand side. Energy efficiency is a response by demand. It doesn't have the cost of that. The consumer want to participate in the market, and they can help in this process. I had a participation when I studied at NEA. I worked in a unit called Clean Energy Transition Program. It's an energy transition program. I worked with other colleagues in an organization called MI's Institute. We will try to catalyze independently the discussions regarding the energy transition, and with a council of notables, experts that will contribute in the discussion. And I'm happy to have Professor Joisa Dutra, Paulo Pedrosa, and Philip. And with this, we expect to work together for the sector. And back to the Asher's presentation, I think it's really interesting. I would call it, we need to discuss uncomfortable topics before they become uncomfortable facts. You will not discuss the coffin you will be buried in while you're living, but it's important to talk about that. We are in a timeout moment, and we need to think of the plan Bs. There's an alternative of looking at the problems with geoengineering and technologies of negative emission. They have to be in the agenda. So these things are in the agenda of many countries. Some countries are in favor, others are against. But I would like to bring this provocation, because if you want to cool down the temperature of the Earth or prevent the increase of the temperature, we need to look at technologies that would be Plan B. Otherwise, Asher's presentation provides a very pragmatic message to us, and it's hard for us to think. Okay, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Luis. You have complemented everything, mainly what the panel said, mainly when you talked about the cost. And so there are many questions, many interesting questions that I have received. And so from the audience, and so I'm going to start with the questions. Hauser, the first one is for you. Which government alternatives are recommended so that we can electrify industries, the heating of homes, and transportation sectors? Wow, that's a broad question. So Agora has just released a study about the decarbonization of the industry, and it's very interesting. And the decarbonization of the industry in Europe is very interesting, and it's a huge challenge for us. And it goes through public policies. Public policies must exist. Taxes for the for the use of gas. And regarding the heating of homes, we are studying the reduction of the electric energy, so that the heating of homes can be done by heat pumps. And there is a subsidy of about 6 million euros so that they can buy electrical devices for transportation. And so there is heavy work of public policies in these three sectors. And always with this use of subsidies, because Brazil is going through a moment of restrictions, budgetary restrictions, and the subsidies are going to become more and more difficult and questioned. Yeah, that's true. So once again, the situation in Germany is completely different from the situation in Brazil, right? And so when we are moving now towards renewables and you depend on the sun and the wind, and you don't have hydroelectrical power plants, and you don't have biomass, and so the cost panorama is different. So our subsidies have to come from God. Is that it? Yeah. And so I just wanted to make one comment. So those who pay the subsidies of the renewable energies in the past, because they were used to be expensive, and now the household consumers, if we reduce the prices, I'm not subsidizing the households. I'm eliminating the burden. And what could happen to substitute is the pricification of the carbon, the emissions from the transportation industry, and house heating things. And so you should create a tax over the emissions. And we favor now the electrical use. And this is justifiable because the electrical use is more and more renewable. And so I need to update you, my friend, Luiz Barroso. And so the plan was to go up to 65 by 2020. So at the moment that we have such an impact on renewables, it doesn't make so much sense taxing the electrical energy, but fossil fuels. So do you understand the alternative for the electrification of the transportation sector in Brazil? Because we have ethanol in Brazil, and the CO2 emission in Brazil has always been high. So how can the transportation sector finally contribute? Excellent questions. I don't know if I'm the most appropriate person to answer that. I believe the experts here, they are. And if you want to interrupt, okay, and add to the answer, please feel free to do so, okay? So it's more complicated for Brazil because Brazil has ethanol as an alternative to fossil fuels. And you also have a vehicle sector that is really, really powerful. And so but if the other experts would like to answer. Well, that's a good question, because the electrical cars outside Brazil, they are highly subsidized. So electrical cars, they have a challenge in Brazil, which is the cost of the car per se, and also the cost of electricity to fuel the car, because Brazil is the country that offers cheap wholesale electricity, but expensive retail electricity. And so I believe that there's going to be a transition fuel. And so the ethanol is going to be the transition fuel until we can buy electrical cars so that we can fuel our cars, unless we create taxes, specific taxes for electrical cars. But ethanol is going to be a bridge, like a bridge. It's going to be the fuel of the transition. A question for Luiz Barroso. What do you believe that would be a good regulation for Brazil? Why is Brazil subsidizing renewable sources? Well, nowadays Brazil has subsidies for the, and so there is a discount in the transmission But there are subsidies that are indirect, such as the contracts for the renewables that went to the auctions. They would surf on the flexibility given by the hydroelectrical power plants without paying for these costs. And so if we eliminate the subsidies from the renewables and we have to remove it from all of them at the same time, they're going to continue being highly competitive. These subsidies were interesting for a first moment, but we have been doing this, and the results are very, very much more interesting than the alternative. So this is a reflection that is very important for us to consider. And so the subsidy can come in several ways, not only being called subsidies. We saw this in the public policy for the prices of gasoline and how this impacted ethanol directly. It was not called a subsidy, but it impacted. And some of these indirect subsidies, for instance, whenever we don't have wind or the sun, the ghostbuster to solve it is the hydroelectrical power plant. And the cost of this backup was thrown on top of the consumer. But if you carry out the calculations and you leave this in an explicit way, and we see this numerically speaking, it's not very high, but it's much cleaner. It's much cleaner for you to transfer the cost to the person who generated the cost. And in the case of Brazil, this is not a meaningful cost. So eliminating the subsidies in a few cases, it is not going to cause any impacts. You're just carrying out the calculations, but it's you need to have transparency. We need to have transparency. Carlos also talked about transparency. So the distributed, this is one of the most democratic ways. How can ANEEL help out in the generation without harming the poorest segments of our population? Because they need this in their households. So the first thing that ANEEL can do, I understood your question perfectly, no problem. So the best thing that ANEEL can do to avoid the current regulatory design that it has, because it generates social differences. So with the current system, this can increase the inequality, because instead of financing a solar panel, those who are rich, and so I believe that it is important, and so to have a public consultation, and so the main role of ANEEL is to develop the tariffs so that they can, and so they,
the rest, I think that there's nothing special to be done. I think it's simply to allow that with the time we're supposed to install a panel, and it can happen. In that sense, it's certain that probably the poor classes will not be covered by the distributed generation because they don't have the financial circumstances to do. But we could think of the cost of others. The costs, to use the costs in a correct way in the tariff system, we know that it's necessary, but it's urgent and it's important. Especially because we are in this topic that are in the press in the past weeks, which is the privatization of Eletrobras and the statization of Enel in Goiás. So I think these topics are relevant to debate, especially in an important sector such as this one. This question, they summarize well this moment. energy efficiency will be key in the transition. When you reduce the consumption, the consumers reduce the payment of tariffs. How can we manage the impact on distributors and the taxes? He's talking about business models. I think this question has to do with what Carlos showed in his presentation. It is a real challenge. How can we think of a regulation model for distribution in which the distributors they have incentive to produce actions in which the consumer will reduce the consumption in the distributor and where the distributor is paid by the consumption times an electricity tariff. I think no bakery will incentive a consumer to eat less bread because they sell bread. So we have the need of a tariff structure that is appropriate and a model, but in this topic is a little more technical, and a model that will evolve for the consumer to have a menu of tariffs, and then they will be able to choose in which tariff classification they are. They could be more or less adequate for incentives of efficiency measures. But to answer quickly with no technical language, I think it's the energy efficiency depends on the business model and adaptation of regulation for the energy efficiency to be a vector of business.
Do you agree, Dr. Philip? Yes, I agree with you. I just wanted to emphasize this because efficiency is one thing, and flexi efficiency. We need to flexibilize and create efficiency. We need to flexibilize the consumption part so the distributor can have an important role and not sell the maximum volume of energy. And then we can create an orchestration between the variable consumption and the constant consumption to diminish the added value, and the service of orchestrating the system is going to add value, and this should be paid for. How do you see this in Latin America? And so, as you talked, the distributor has a new role, and so we have to encourage them, and we also have to encourage the consumer. So how can you facilitate this new role? And so, Mr. Carlos, can you see this being discussed? Yes, totally. So it seems that there is an opportunity to do services in a more effective way regarding the consumption that we have. And so we can discuss this tomorrow. And Philip mentioned this earlier. And so you can change the market. You can use electricity in other sectors. And so maybe you can approach the consumer and say, look, you can save money if you change your car. And then and so you can use a car that doesn't use fossil fuels. You need to charge this. This is going to be used for the system. We need to integrate all of the energy resources. And so we should go beyond the only using fossil fuels. And in the USA, I say the same thing. I started working at MIT in 2011. And when I started there, the MIT students, they saw the electrical sector as something boring, monotonous. And in the last 10 years, over 10,000 startups started trying to find solutions for the energy sector. 20,000 startups, 20,000. And so since 1995, they didn't have anything, but maybe. And so the main idea is for all of the innovations to generate new businesses. And so the technological area, the startups, recently I interviewed the business person from the financial sector. They are bringing the startup to Brazil. It's like an app. It's similar to an app, so that you can manage the placement of solar panels at households, at bakeries, at stores. And so you create an opportunity of creating many startups to fill in the market, to provide the... I wanted to add a piece of information because Carlos mentioned. And so Agora carried out a study saying that it's possible to electrify the entire transportation system in Germany. And by doing that, you're going to increase the electrical consumption. But we dilute the cost of fuels, fossil fuels, because then the price is subdivided by a higher group of people. So the electrification of public transportation subsidizes the transmission grid that Germany is going to have to create anyhow. So the increase of the participation of electricity is going to generate a virtuous cycle, because the more people consume electricity, the lower the cost of the infrastructure that we're going to have. And you're going to reduce the revenues on the side of the price, but you're going to increase it on the side of the consumption, because you're going to have other uses for electrical energy. In Costa Rica, we see this a lot, because everything in Costa Rica is run by electricity. You can only cook if you have electricity. Everything is electrical. This question is for you, Asher. Specifically for the electrical sector and for the wind and solar sources, can they be a vector for the development of regions? How can they bring social development for the poorest regions in Brazil? I believe mainly due to the fact that the technology is different. The technology can be distributed, and you have huge possibilities. You can have huge possibilities of the poorest areas having access to this. There is an interesting case in Australia, and we're having a strong debate about the use of renewables in our country, because we also have huge coal reserves, but Australia has huge sources of wind and sun. And since our population is small in a huge territory, we have all of the conditions to implement distributed sources of energy. And the maintenance of the grid has a high cost, and it's low on efficiency. And so we can expand the distribution of energy via other technologies.
Regarding the access of electricity, for the people to have more access to electricity, you create possibilities for these people even to start businesses, households, businesses. So you bring development to these people. And you also have this cultural aspect. But for example, in parts of Africa, the implementation of clean stoves for cooking food. In the tribes, they always had the importance of the smoke in cooking. So when they removed it and there was no smoke, so it was a loss for the culture. So we need to think of the cultural aspects in this energy transition. It is a point that complements what was mentioned before when we discuss these environmental issues. We are creating other impacts that will impact the economy, life quality, cost reductions in several areas. Because when you hear someone say that the environmental issue is an antagonist regarding the economic growth, this vision is quite closed because it doesn't show the opportunity impact of life quality improvement and other advancements that it can provide. So the discussion is more complex. Besides transformation, you need to have a cultural transformation. It's what we saw recently in France and also in Chile now. Examples of countries where they had a transition without considering the social implication for different sectors of the country. And then they saw that it's not easy to facilitate this transition when the society doesn't accept it. Chile is a country that I have been visiting a lot, and we are following up their situation. And there is a data from Chile that says that the changes that were done in their social security system, something essential was missing, which is to tell the population they were doing that. So the EFPs had a good return for the ones who invested. But most people didn't even know that that money was theirs. So they wouldn't do the follow-up. So I interviewed the government secretary, and she said that their concern is to educate the people regarding the energy transformation. I think it's the same here. We need to have a great investment in culture and education for the people to participate in the process. So question now for you, Luis. What are the most appropriate measures to manage the cost allocation regarding the greater insertion of renewable sources? Before answering these annoying questions regarding costs and risks, I would like to go back to a topic that you mentioned, which is the transformational aspect of renewable sources. I think that a technology that was a game changer that connects with the startups, which is the solar technology with distributed generation. Nowadays, the solar energy with the distributed generation with the batteries that makes the consumers to know that they can have an investment that is a small investment with zero cost. So there's a startup in Germany, Zoni, that created communities of people who have solar energy in this concept of Uberization of electricity. If you store energy, you can store for your neighbor, so you become an Airbnb of electrons. All this done by an app that was developed by a company that was in a startup and was bought by Shell 1 year ago. So in this case, we can see the revolution that the solar energy will do, and it has to do also with regulation. Another example is an example in Africa, where you have a population with no access to electricity. People are still using candles and lamps. So there are small kids, I think it's boom box. Well, there are small kits that are battery that has electricity for a couple of hours, but it would be enough to provide citizenship to the people, and it's not expensive. So these things are happening in a decentralized manner, and they are a focus of 8,000 out of 20 startups that Carlos mentioned. Regarding the cost benefit, and to avoid a long and tedious answer, I think a word that will define this topic is the capacity for the companies to prepare portfolios. The cost is to be able to produce when there's a cloud over your solar panel. If you have a portfolio with another technology, you'll be able to provide the energy. So it is valid for the other renewable energy sources. In Brazil, we have auctions that do not allow the portfolio of assets. The portfolios will determine very well the risk factor of each technology, and to do so, all the risks must be allocated. The companies, the technologies, and the agents who can manage it. If you have an infinite risk for an agent that doesn't have capacity, for example, the risk of production of renewables to renewables, and you can think of the mitigant agent as the portfolios. I think it's a market agent and it's winning to Brazil. Now a question to Hauser. Based on the PD of 2019, only 3% of GHG emissions will come from the electric sector. The sector must be excessively worried about emissions in this case.
I believe that the sector should worry about the emissions coming from the transportation sector, from the factories, the industrial sector, and also with the emissions from other countries. Since Brazil has this potential for renewable energies, yes, I have nothing against ethanol, but we also have diesel to electrify public transportation. We could diminish a lot the emissions coming from fuels. We could use electricity for the transportation sector. There's also the possibility of electrifying industrial processes, and Germany is starting to prospect electrical fuel sources. So I wouldn't worry myself about the residual emissions of the electrical sector. I would be very, very concerned about not losing this differential, but also to enjoy the vocation that Brazil has, because the electrical sector only represents 17% of the energy used in Brazil, but no, not only 17, 40%. And maybe they could export electrical intensives to the world. And so it's interesting because we connect this to what Asher said, the need for people to take part in this debate, because this seems to be far, far away from our reality, to electrify many parts of our lives, and this seems to be far away. And you mentioned startups that you are creating the Uberization of the sector. So bringing this discussion more and more to people's lives can create opportunities. And as it was discussed here, many people, many professionals don't know the opportunities, the work opportunities that are available in the sector and the demands that you have. And so I believe it's a cultural aspect, taking this debate to our society, to people, so that people can see the sector in a different way. And not as something that is inaccessible. Oh, this is not for me. And the question is a little on the defensive, and the electrical sector in Brazil should be attacking and say, look, I have the capacity to decarbonize and decarbonize the other sectors. And this would place us in a position in the international community as protagonists in a debate that is relevant for the entire world. I have a question here. So the per capita energy consumption in Brazil is half of what it is in Germany. So why is a public consultation going to go against the distributed production and create a more sustainable way, mainly via solar panels? Sorry, I didn't understand your question. Public consultation is not, it does not go against the distributed generation. The public consultation does not do that, number one. I didn't understand your question. And in the case of ANEL, What ANEL is proposing is the recognition of the costs of the infrastructure, and those who have the solar panel, they're going to be able to use it if there is no sun. So if they do not want to pay for the infrastructure, no problem. Pay for a battery and get out of the grid. But this is important. So my opinion is that the discussion that ANEL is placing on the table conceptually is completely right. There is no movement against the distributed generation. Even with ANEL's public consultation, and so there is distributed generation, and it's going to grow, there is room for growth. So I don't see it like this, okay? Asher, there's a question for you. Regarding the regional integration between the electrical sectors in Latin America, could we contribute with a higher insertion of renewables and also the use of electricity? This question is for all of you, not only for Asher. So the integration of the electrical sector in the region, I don't have so much knowledge about this, but I believe it's more complicated than that. And so we can have it in an equitable way. And so, but could Brazil become a leader in this process? In this regional integration process, do you think Brazil could become one of the main stakeholders and a protagonist? This topic is very interesting because the regional energy integration in Latin America, it makes all the sense in the world in terms of the economics of it, because they have different grids. Brazil is more hydroelectrical, Argentina is more thermoelectrical. So there are differences because of the time changes and when the electricity is more used in Brazil, in Chile, and something for the future is with the recent integration between Mexico and Guatemala, and with the construction of a line between Panama and Colombia, virtually it is going to be possible to distribute 1 electron from Canada to Patagonia in Argentina. So let's come back to Latin America. So the integration makes all the sense in the world, and it started having making more economic sense because some countries can export the services that Carlos described, and also you can balance because of the insertion of renewables. Brazil has the ability to be a leader here. Brazil can do this, and Costa Rica as well, and Guatemala and Colombia, and getting a plane to Europe, and like Norway is trying to do in Europe. So it's integrating itself with Poland, Germany, and so Norway is 99%, 95% hydroelectrical, and then they can export. There is a discussion. We can have a different discussion. What kind of business model can we use so that the exchange between two countries is not gonna be terrible? And so our experience with other Latin American countries has been bad. So there is mistrust between the countries so that we can establish a relationship to exchange electricity in the long run. And so we have been doing this in the short run. But
in the current moment of Latin America and the discussions that we're having, it does not favor the beginning of this discussion, which is a shame because we could have an economic gain for the whole region. The region is a moment of transformations, especially because of the price of commodities. There was a change, and then the countries are suffering that, and it reflects in all the transformations. To do the integration of the energy transformation can be a vector for attracting investments and development and opportunities for the whole region. And I will take advantage of this moment we were together here as great friends. in Central America countries, they are connected by CEPAC. It's a transmission line, and they have a regional energy market, and possibly it's one of the most advanced markets in the world. So there's a struggle to integrate more and more to resolve these complementarities. The process of Central America, in which Carlos and myself work a lot, is a process that has to be looked at carefully. Maybe you're going to change my research project. No, no, no. Relax. It is an interesting case. The Central America case of energy integration is very interesting, with a history of failures and success. Then it could help us not to make the same mistakes. Well, now a question for you all. So um, you should all give your opinion on that. Still, regarding the energy integration, how do you see that? Maybe after all these years, unfortunately, I've become very skeptic. I come from Europe, where there was an energy integration process, which is the most important process in the world. In spite of this, Europe has something that you don't see in Latin America, which is a general political construction that gathers the different countries that it has the ability to make the countries do some things, which is the institutional level that lacks in Latin America. There is a history of suspicion, and it comes from Brazil and Argentina, and I think that we should internalize it as something that, well, the potential should be really great. But being a little pessimistic, I don't think that it will happen. It would be great for Mexico to export all the solar potential that they have in the north of the country. It would be great to share the storage capacity of Brazil, but I don't really believe that it's possible. To think of what Luis mentioned as an alternative to develop the transport network for renewable options, and then we could compatibilize all the problems. I didn't carry out all the studies that Luis did with all these failures, and economically it could be feasible to think of the future in other countries. That would be really wonderful, but I don't think it would happen, really. Some studies have demonstrated that the offshore wind energy can be used in the energy bases. Are there any possible public policies to stimulate the offshore wind energy? Well, in Europe, yes, certainly. We have some policies for the contracting of sea wind power, due to the lack of opportunity onshore. So Brazil can observe this and see that what are the costs for this, and maybe bring this solution to Brazil. I don't know if it would make sense for Brazil. Of course, to remove the barriers is important, to open opportunities with isonomy, with other sources, but I don't know if it makes sense to pay the cost of the development for the offshore wind energy. What about you, Luis? You know the cost spreadsheet. I think the idea of having aeolic offshore is a good idea, but Brazil is not stuck. Through the EPE, our institution, we are doing studies for identifying the potential for this type of energy source and to check what would be the regulatory changes to allow the insertion of this technology when we think that the cost compensates in relation to the alternatives that the country has. There's another question for you, Luis. What is the role of the states in the implementation of renewable sources? Can they create complementary incentives for the insertion of renewables? That's an excellent question, because if I'm being very honest and transparent with you all, there is still a lot of lack of coordination in the planning in the federal level compared connected to the state. So yeah, we're thinking of the integration with other countries, but we don't see that in Brazil from the central government to, with the states. Yeah, it's easy in Costa Rica, but not here. Well, the states, in an independent way, they adopt specific tax policies that have a distortion in the planning. For example, you can have a specific technology that, by the electric energetic point of view, is interesting in the southeast region, but because of the tax environment in the northeast, it can be a bad idea, and then it brings this lack of balance in the system, in the federal system in a whole. We need to have more preparation of the states to define what they want in terms of energy, because the states sometimes they want a lot of development, but the development cannot come at any cost. It has to be efficient, otherwise we will make a mess in the electricity account in the end of the day. Also, we need to think of the integrated planning. So we need to do our homework, and it's a very interesting topic for Brazil to work in the next years. And how are the states working on this topic, or are they not working? Well, there is an articulation that was started when I was managing EP. So we get São Paulo, Minas, Espírito Santo, all these states to start an integrated planning to integrate what would be the state, the feasible, economically feasible public policies in the state. But this work didn't advance very much. So I think Brazil is really behind on regarding what could be the integration of the 27 states of the country, which is not easy as well.
I have a final question, and then we're going to wrap up the session this morning. So, with the marginal cost of the expansion, and so some of the assets can become less used, how can we adjust the assets that exist with the new technologies? This was a concern. And so the funding, the revenues, and how can we maintain this new business model? And here we have this risk for the assets becoming not used. Yes? Well, I'm a polite. I'm going to transfer this question to Carlos first. So this is a question that goes back to a topic. Once again, a word that came here. So the separation between the backbone and the energy. And so, Mara, Brazil for a long time, when I started working in the electrical sector, and so how can we handle the idle assets? So in the 70s, Brazil was 70% electrical, hydroelectrical. And so it was 0, and then it went out, and then it went down to 0, because hydroelectrical power plants, they were able to meet the demands at a very, very low price. And so the price was low for a long time when the water was low. And so there was this volatility in the prices. And Brazil solved this by creating hiring the electricity in the long run. And so most of the projects, they have their revenues guaranteed for those who sell. Those who sell electricity in the fairs, it's a small share of the market. And then we improved. We improved the prices, and then it became a little more stable, a little crazy sometimes, but more stable. And so if we have a higher penetration index, we can go back to the 000 prices in this logic that Brazil had in the past. Each generation project is going to need a revenue component that is fixed to guarantee the payment for a service offered to the system. And so in public consultation number 33, we call this reliability. I pay a generator to give me reliability, and it's called a coverage. And this coverage and this continuous generation of revenue is going to be a leverage for the projects. And along these lines, and around the world, things have been advancing, and I threw this question to Carlos because Carlos has been discussing this abroad, because there is a part of the flow that is insured, that this is impossible. Otherwise, the volatility is going to increase a lot. And we had this in the past. Are you going to say something? So talking a little bit in the world, and so once the markets were liberalized, and so there was a retroactive power, and so a liter of gasoline, so we decided how much the price of the gasoline was first. We found that out to then decide which car we were going to buy. And so we consumers, we are responsible. We are responsible. And are we willing to sign a commitment for the next 7 or 8 years? Everybody understood that a car was purchased for 7 years, 10 years, and nobody's surprised with this. But none of us would be willing to sign a contract so that we can compromise ourselves with a solar panel for some time. There is a paradox in how we deal with electricity when it comes to other sectors. So, in the past, we were not aware of this. And in Europe and in the USA, as Luis mentioned before, maybe this can happen. But the variable costs, and now we can sign a contract to fund this. And as consumers, we do not want to sign these contracts. We believe that the government is going to solve all the problems. But there is no remedy. We need to find mechanisms, as Luis Barroso mentioned before. So the regulator forces us, consumers, as maintaining a certain financial stability and relying on the investors. But the big paradox is that we have learned how to use electricity, and when it rains, we have water. So we just plug, and we don't know where the electricity comes from. Brazil had an auction in 2004, and there are no ways of doing this in a different way. And so the capacity to maintain a guarantee is to get compromised with this, to make a commitment with this. The coverage that Luis was mentioning impacts all of the consumers, the free consumers and the regulated consumers. One of the big problems that we have in Brazil is that I can have the possibility of being a free consumer. I can go from one side to the other to benefit myself in an unfair way. And this is a guarantee that the long-term contracts give to me. Otherwise, the system would collapse. So guys, we need to wrap up. And so just all of you, please say your final remarks, what are the main challenges, what are the solutions for Brazil, Latin America, and the Caribbean. So, considering that we are at the Federal Court of Accounts, at the TCU, we understand that the TCU is the police of Brazil. It is a very serious and interesting agency. There's nothing better than the police reminding you to do what you have to do. This is a good concept. And so I'm very happy for having been here these past few days. I was here yesterday also. I have a few suggestions. And so the electrical sector has huge potential, and the problems that were described by Asher, and this is important to ensure that the electrical sector is sustainable, financially sustainable. This is essential. And from my perspective, we need to improve the transparency of the system and the distribution mechanisms so that we can hire services in the long run, signing long-term contracts. And the consumers have to be involved in the debate. Nobody should benefit only because the system is not transparent. The system must be transparent. This is very important. Avoid subsidies to technologies that don't need subsidies, and this is essential. Luis mentioned this. And maybe they are not going to be necessary now. So eliminate all the subsidies that are not necessary. And also create a wonderful regulation. And this is not only necessary, it's urgent. If you don't do this now, if you don't create good regulation, you're going to see problems. Because those who are benefiting now, they can say, this is not my fault, there is a rule, I follow the rule. So they justify their mistakes by saying this, by doing this. So it would be terrible to make them go back. The faster you solve this, the better it's going to be. So I have two messages here. The first message is to go back what I was saying during my presentation. The sciences, they tell us that we are moving towards a disaster. We cannot wait any longer. We must move forward now. And the second message is that the transition into a clean energy sector is possible. And during this transition, we have to bear in mind some other issues, the economic aspects, and as Carlos mentioned, how can we structure everything? How can we do it? How can we go through this transition so things can work out? In the last few years, we have to think about the economic aspects. How can we facilitate this transition? And the second issue is the environmental issue. And we have been thinking about this because we know that this transition is going to be wonderful for us, and we're going to be able to preserve the environment. And the other thing is that it's not only the climate changes, but the contamination of the air. I believe that in Brazil, we don't think so much about energy because since the electrical energy is clean, we don't think so much about this. But in China, for instance, this is the main reason for the transition in China, because they know that the contamination of the air, and in India as well, and so they cannot tolerate any longer. They cannot bear it any longer. And so we have to think about the transition very carefully. And this is a social aspect, The social aspect, we haven't been thinking about it so much. We know that it's economically feasible, but in the social aspect, we must carry out this transition now, fast, and it's not easy. In Chile, how did it start? How did they start having the problems? Oh, they started this civil unrest in Chile because of the increase of the subway fee ticket. And so Santiago has many electrical pulses, more than China. So they are skipping over the transition, and the social issues starting arising because of this. And then it went to other issues. And in France as well, when they try to increase the prices, the the prices of oil and gas for the transportation sector, they had a demonstration. They had demonstrations. So for me, from my perspective, the most critical point for the next points is how can we do this transition quickly? Because we have to do it now. Otherwise, we're not going to reach the SDGs or the country's goals. How can we do that? And the social issue?
The social issue is relevant. My mother-in-law is from Chile. She lives in Santiago, and she has no doubt that the catalyzer of the revolution there was a statement from the ministry saying that, well, you go to another time. If it's expensive, go to another. It's the same thing as saying you don't have bread, eat something else. So this is the point of being concerned of the social aspect, especially in our region that has suffered with the economic stagnation in the past years. Well, as Luis says, well, we don't need energy transition. We need an economic transformation. Brazil is in the front of the curve of this economic transformation. Brazil and the Latin American countries, because they have the possibility of have access of technology and improvement of renewable energy. If they see this as an opportunity and use it to overcome social problems and also lack of investment and lack of opportunity, it should be a vision to motivate the political action, the action of the regulators. The effective regulation is essential, as Carlos mentioned. The system of renewable energy is more complex. It demands a smarter regulation compared to the old system. But it could bring an erosion of the energy cost, and it leverages not only investments in the electric sector, but also in the industry. And it generates the income that we need to leverage the region. And lastly, I think it's a point that it's quite important for us to ensure that the enterprises are developed in tune with the environmental and social issues demanded. If we don't have an acceptance of the renewable projects in the territory, in the long term, it can generate a cost that will make the transition difficult. We can think of that as a vector for regional development, and TCU, the Federal Court of Accounts of Brazil, can compatibilize different policies. There are policies of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and also the objectives of the electric renovation. So we need to compatibilize both of them. Well, thank you. I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank TCU in a collective way representing the EPE. The event is very interesting, and I don't want to be repetitive, so I like to say that we have here in this panel two topics to discuss under the umbrella of climate change: the mitigation and adaptation. So climate change is there, the winter or the summer is coming, but looking at the mitigation, we have the type 1 action. Of all actions that Philip and Carlos mentioned regarding the adaptation of regulation. Regarding mitigation, I think Brazil needs to look at efficient public policies on the cost-benefit aspect. We have one of the most expensive tariffs in the planet, and we cannot throw money in the trash can. In this context, Brazil has to look at the innovation. We didn't discuss it here, but public policies for innovation in which we can try to create solutions to really solve the problem. And in point 2, we have the adaptation. I think Plan B has to be discussed more and more. What if Earth gets hotter or colder? We don't know, but the adaptation policies have to be discussed. And I like what Asher mentioned. It's a very pragmatic talk, and I make fun with this. It feels that like you were discussing the purchase of your coffin before you die, but we really need to discuss the adaptation. Brazil can be a leader on this. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you all for the participation, and thank you. And I'd like to thank TCU for the invitation. It was a very fruitful debate we had in the morning. So I see the concern on the transformation, how it creates a series of fears and makes us to be stuck while we could have an opportunity for innovation. In my area, I'm a journalist, and we see this moment of people being losing jobs because the internet and the newspapers. But actually, there is an incredible opportunity for journalists. There's a group of journalists that left Global TV 2 years ago, and they created this journalism channel on YouTube. They are not YouTubers; they are journalists providing news on YouTube. And we received funding from Google to create this group, and they say that we are benchmark for journalism in the world. And yesterday I was in Lisbon talking about this initiative. So it created a huge opportunity. So we are 40 people. In the beginning we were only 10, and now we are 40 people in this group, and we open an office in London, another office in Portugal. So it is a way of looking at the movements of transformation. They really open many opportunities, and technology helps us bring the opportunities. This talk in the morning, I'm leaving this panel with many ideas to talk about, and maybe I will even change my research project. And people do not debate these things so much. They look at an ecologic discussion, and not when I say eco, I don't mean economy, but ecology. But it is an economic issue, and it can create many opportunities for all of us and improve the life quality of the society. So thank you very much for your participation in this panel, and see you next time. We'd like to thank the journalist Maraluke who conducted this panel, and the panelists. Now we're going to have the lunch break, and TCU has a restaurant in this complex of buildings. Our support team can show you the way to the restaurant. We're going to go back to our activities at 2 p.m. Have a good lunch.